This is called the bulkhead or the header board of the trailer. The front end of the trailer has reinforced steel beams on the inside so that if there's an accident or something, the freight does not make it through the front of the trailer and into the back of the tractor. So header board or bulkhead. What we're going to look at the front of the trailer for is we're going to look for missing rivets, any kind of holes, and any damage on the trailer. These holes, as the wind blows into them, will pressurize and cause the inside of the trailer to separate, and then insulation ends up all over the freight. From the header board, we're going to move down to our glad hands. On the glad hands, we want to make sure that they are properly mounted and secured. All the nuts and bolts are present and tight. We want to make sure that the seal is intact, it's not cracked or frayed, and that we are free of debris inside each one of the glad hands. Next, we're going to move to the apron. The apron starts right here. This is a heavy piece of steel, hardened steel. They roll it up underneath the trailer, and in the center of the apron we have our kingpin. The kingpin is actually welded into the apron itself. If the kingpin is bent or cracked in any manner, the kingpin reject the trailer and don't take the trailer. Also, this is called the shank of the kingpin right up here. It's a cutaway on the middle of the kingpin. That is where the locking jaw wraps around. Next, we're going to move to the top of the trailer. Up at the top of the trailer, we have our clearance lights. Clearance lights should be properly mounted and secured. All the nuts and bolts should be present and tight, and the lights should not be cracked, bent, or broken, and the lights are amber. From the lights, we'll move down and we'll start checking the sides of the trailer, and then we'll roll around and check the bottom of the trailer. On the sides of the trailer, we're going to check for exactly the same thing as we do around on the front on the bulkhead. We're going to check for missing rivets, any holes, and any damage in the side of the trailer. Also, we have DOT reflective tape along the sides of the trailer. The trailer must be covered on the sides with 50% DOT reflective tape. If you have a 48-foot trailer, you must have 24 feet of DOT tape down the side of the trailer. When we move back onto the trailer, right here we start running into the cross members on the bottom, or where the floor is. On the cross members, these have nuts and bolts on the cross members that are holding them in place, and they support the wooden floor on the inside of the trailer. Cross members must be properly mounted and secured. All of our nuts and bolts are present and tight. None of these are cracked, bent, or broken. When we move to the floor or the deck of the trailer, we're going to be looking at the wooden floor. Make sure that there is no holes and that there's no dry rot on the floor. After that, we would continue to roll up onto the side and back up underneath as we move our way back to the landing gear, checking periodically the side and the bottom of the trailer for any kind of damage until we get back to the landing gear. Once we get back to the landing gear, this right here is the landing gear leg. This is called the pad or the foot. This is a cross member. These are diagonal braces. And this right here is your connecting rod that runs from side to side. Over here on this side we have our crank handle with our gearbox on the inside. All of these items must be properly mounted and secured. All of our nuts and bolts are present and tight. Nothing is cracked, bent, or broken. We want to make sure that our handle is intact and stowed properly. We also want to make sure with this connecting rod that we have a nut and a bolt on either end of it. Otherwise, whenever you use your crank handle, one side of the landing gear is going to do what we want it to. The other side of the landing gear is not going to move. After the landing gear, we're going to keep rolling up and down, checking our cross members, our floor, and the sides of the trailer until we move our way all the way back here to the light. This right here is a marker, blinker, and a flasher plus a reflector. The light itself is properly mounted and secured. All of the nuts and bolts are present and tight. Nothing is cracked, bent, or broken, and this is amber in color. From the light, we're still going to be looking up and down. Get back here, this is called a retaining spring. This retaining spring holds our air lines a minimum of 18 inches up off of the ground. That way nothing on the roadway will interfere and rip our lines out. For our springs, we want to make sure that the springs are properly mounted and secured and that they are not stretched out. For the air lines and the electric line, we want to make sure that the air lines are properly mounted and secured. They have no abrasions, bubbles, cuts, or dry rot in them, and that the air lines are not leaking. For the electrical line, we want to make sure that it's properly mounted and secured, and that we have no cracked insulation, no bare wires, and no tape. Next, we're going to talk about our slide rail. The slide rail runs from this position almost all the way to the very back of the trailer. The slide rail itself is how we move the tandems forward and backwards so that we can balance our load. Slide rail is properly mounted and secured. There are no nuts and bolts on the slide rail. The slide rail is welded at every one of the cross members, so we would need to check each one of those welds and make sure that they're not cracked or broken. Everything else in this area is all part of this cradle system right here. Everything else is mounted on that cradle system, which utilizes our slide rail to move back and forth. On the cradle itself, we're going to talk about specific items. One thing that we're going to start with, I like to start on the inside of the tires because I can see it as I look across the trailer. My brake pads and my drum are both properly mounted and secured. Nuts and bolts are all present and tight. Nothing is cracked, bent, or broken. The brake pad is no less than 1/4 of an inch thick, and the brake pad is also free of oil, grease, and debris. From there, I'm going to move toward the driver's side of the trailer. I'm going to move to my suspension. My suspension has a front and a rear mount. It has a leaf. It has 2 U-bolts. We also have a lower and an upper shock mount, airbag mount with an airbag, and we have an upper and a lower shock mount with a shock. All these items are properly mounted and secured. All of my nuts and bolts are present and tight. Nothing appears to be cracked, bent, or broken. My airbag is made out of rubber, so no abrasions, bubbles, cuts, or dry rot on the airbag, and the airbag is not leaking. Also, my shock is not leaking. From there, we're going to move just down below the suspension. This right here is called either a torque rod or a torsion, a torque bar or a torsion bar. The purpose of this bar is to stabilize the suspension. On the other side, it's called an arm. It has 2 adjustments over here on the driver's side. These adjustments are so that they can keep the axle squared up with the trailer so your trailer doesn't sidetrack as you drive down the road. This one is called either a torque arm or a torsion arm. The reason we call it an arm is because it's movable or adjustable. From there, we're going to move inside. Both of these are properly mounted and secured. My nuts and bolts are present and tight. None of them are cracked, bent, or broken. From there, we will move to the inside and come to the brakes. We have 2 air lines. We have dual brake chamber. On the back side of the brake chamber, we have a push rod and a slack adjuster, which is held together with a clevis pin and a cotter pin. These items are all properly mounted and secured. All the nuts and bolts are present and tight. Nothing is cracked, bent, or broken. I have no abrasions, bubbles, cuts, or dry rot on my air lines, and the system itself is not leaking. With the brakes released, I would not have any more than 1 inch of play in my slack adjuster. Next, we're going to talk about the cradle and the slide rail locking pins. This is the slide rail locking pin release handle. When we pull this handle out, the locking pins retract, and that's how we can slide the cradle back and forth on the slide rail. With the handle in, the pin should be out and locked. We have 2 pins on either side. Usually they're either right in front of or right behind the tires. We have this one here and this one right back here in front of the other set of tires. When we move back here to the tires and the rims, you can see that these are called bud rims because the rims are butted right up together. There should be no gap between those rims themselves. Also, between the tires, the gap that we have between the tires should be free of debris, and the tires should not be touching each other. The tires and the rims are properly mounted and secured. All the nuts and bolts are present and tight. Nothing is cracked, bent, or broken. With the tires themselves, we look for TCP. T stands for tread, a minimum of 2/32 tread. Also, the tread should be evenly worn on the tires. And these tires could be a recap. These tires must also be the same size of tire and the same type of tire. All bias or all radial on that axle. We talk about C. C is the condition of the tire, and we must talk about the inside and the outside of both of these tires. Condition is no abrasions, no bubbles, no cuts, and no dry rot on these tires. P stands for pressure. We want to make sure that the tires are inflated to manufacturer specifications. And we want to check the air pressure in our tires whenever the tire is cold. Lug nuts should be properly mounted and secured. The nuts themselves should be tight. We should have no rust trails coming from the lug nuts, and we should not be able to see any indication of the hole around the edge of the base washer on that lug nut itself. If we do, that's an elongated or an oblong hole, and that rim must be replaced. Also on the rim, we have a metal valve stem with a cap. Should be properly mounted and secured. Nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. And since it holds back air, it should not be leaking. With the axle seal or the hub seal back here, this is a hub. The hub is properly mounted and secured. All of our nuts and bolts are present and tight. Nothing is cracked, bent, or broken, and the seal itself is not leaking. In the center of the cap on the hub, you can see that it is clear plastic. We can check the oil level in the hub itself and make sure that it is between add and full, or minimum and maximum, whatever it reads on the hub. If you cannot see the oil level, you must pull the cap, put your finger in there. You should get oil up to the first knuckle, and then put the cap back in. With the mud flaps must be properly mounted and secured. All the nuts and bolts are present and tight. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. The flaps themselves are not cut or torn, and they must be between 2 inches and 8 inches off of the ground. Now as we move back to the back, this right here is called a holdback chain hook. Holdback chain is on the doors. As we open the doors up, we'll hook the chain inside on the hook. That way when we're backing up or we're pulling forward away from the dock, our doors are not flapping back and forth and damaging people's vehicles. The yellow light right here at the bottom is the ABS light. It's properly mounted and secured. All the nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken, and it is amber in color. When you initially start your vehicle, you need to check in the mirror to see if this light lights up, and then this light should go back off within 90 seconds. This is a marker light. Marker light is properly mounted and secured. Nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. And the light is red in color. As we move around to the back of the trailer, we're required to have 100% DOT reflective tape across the back of the trailer or the back of the bumper. Now when we start with the doors, these are my hinges. These are the doors. These are the door locks, including our handles. And this is our seal, the door seal. All these items are properly mounted and secured. All of our nuts and bolts are present and tight. Nothing is cracked, bent, or broken. This seal is made out of rubber, so there are no abrasions, bubbles, cuts, or dry rot on the seal. Our holdback chain hooks are intact, properly mounted and secured. Nuts and bolts present and tight, not cracked, bent, or broken. The doors are done. When we move down to the lights. All the lights across the back are tail lights or marker lights. All the lights up at the top are going to be your clearance lights. This light right here is a marker light, plus it is a blinker and a flasher. It's properly mounted and secured. Nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken, and is red in color. The inside light is also a marker light, but it is also our brake light. It's properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. Also red in color. We move down below. We're going to talk about our tag and our tag light. Properly mounted and secured. Nuts and bolts are all present and tight. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. Our tag is up to date and our tag light is clear. This is our DOT bumper. It's properly mounted and secured. Our nuts and bolts are present and tight. We have no cracked or broken welds on the bumper itself. And I have 100% DOT reflective tape running across the bumper. The last thing that we have are the clearance lights up at the very top. They're properly mounted and secured. Nuts and bolts are present and tight. Nothing is cracked, bent, or broken. And they are red in color.